didn't leave apartment 3B. That is the first lie I told myself to keep from going insane. I packed my life into cardboard boxes, signed a new lease 600 miles away, and moved to a city where the sun hits the pavement differently. For 3 days, the silence was absolute. No humming, no geometry shifting in the periphery. I sat on my new floor, held my own name in my mouth like a prayer, and convinced myself the nightmare was geography-bound. I was wrong. The prison isn't a place. It happened on the 4th night. I woke up at 3:33 a.m., not because of a clock, but because the air turned metallic, the taste of old copper and ozone. I reached for the light switch, but my hand hit wood. Rough, splintered, ancient wood. I wasn't in my new bedroom. I was back in the hallway of 3B. I could hear the hum, vibrating not in the room, but inside my own skull. The door behind me wasn't a door anymore. It was a solid, seamless slab of black stone fused to the wall. I didn't scream. The terror has been replaced by a cold, hollow curiosity. I walked into the kitchen, but the cabinets were gone. In their place were thousands of tiny black cubes, stacked in perfect, impossible precision. They weren't sitting on shelves. They were hovering, defying gravity, pulsing with that same low-frequency rhythm. They were counting. I could hear it now, a rhythmic, subterranean ticking. The universe isn't silent. It is measuring. It is waiting for me. I found a note on the counter. It was in my handwriting, but the ink looked centuries old. It didn't contain a warning or a plea. It was a diagram, a sketch of a cube, but the lines were wrong. There were too many intersections. I counted the corners. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I turned the paper over. My heart stuttered. Below the sketch I had written, "The 8th corner is not a place you go. It is a thing you become. Do not let it count you." It needs the architect. I heard footsteps, not from the hallway, but from inside the wall. Someone was walking on the other side of the plaster. I pressed my ear against the cold surface and heard a voice, my voice, whispering numbers. It wasn't speaking English or any human tongue. It was listing measurements, coordinates. It was describing the dimensions of my own body, down to the atomic structure. "The blueprint is flawed," the voice whispered. "The architect left a ghost in the machine. Daniel is the ghost." I looked into the living room window. Outside, the city I had moved to was gone. There were no streetlights, no cars, no skyline. There was only a vast, infinite darkness, and suspended in that void, a giant, rotating black cube. It was so large it blotted out the stars. I realized then that the apartment wasn't inside a building. The building was an extension of the cube. We are all living on the surface of a machine, and we think it's reality. I had never actually left. The hum spiked. The black stone slab that had replaced my bedroom door began to crack, not like glass, but like a shifting tectonic plate. Light poured out from the fissures, but it wasn't light. It was an absence of color so profound it hurt to look at. A geometric shadow reached out from the cracks, dragging its edges across the floor. It wasn't a monster. It was a shape. A triangle that didn't have 3 sides. It was trying to force its way into our 3-dimensional reality. I ran for the front door, but the floor began to tilt. The apartment was folding in on itself, the angles becoming acute, then obtuse, then impossible. Everything I touched felt like liquid. I gripped a chair, but my hand passed through it, as if the object hadn't been fully rendered yet. "The design is failing," the wall voice boomed. It wasn't just my voice anymore. It was a chorus of thousands. "The architect is awake. The measurement must be corrected. We need the missing variable." I reached the door and shoved it open. I didn't step into a hallway. I stepped into a long, white corridor that stretched for miles in both directions. Thousands of identical doors lined the walls, each labeled with a name. I saw names from people I went to school with, people I'd forgotten, people I'd never met. I realized with a sickening jolt, these weren't apartments. They were storage units. Every human life is just a data point being held in a cube, waiting for the cube to process them. I started running, passing doors that vibrated with that 33 hertz hum. I reached a door labeled Daniel, but it was already standing open. I looked inside. The room was empty, save for a mirror. But when I looked into it, I didn't see my reflection. I saw a man who looked like me, but his eyes were black stone and he was holding a chisel, carving a ninth corner into the air. He turned, looked at me and smiled. "You're late," he said. "The ninth corner is finally open." I backed away from the mirror, Daniel, but the corridor behind me shifted. The doors didn't lead to rooms anymore. They were dissolving into raw, static light. "The prison isn't for you," the reflection said, stepping out of the glass. He didn't walk. He glided, his feet never touching the floor. "The prison is for the architect. He built the geometry of suffering, and now the cube demands its final. You have to finish the ninth corner." I yelled at myself in the collapse. "I didn't build anything," I shouted, my face contracted, staring at white space. He laughed, the sound of playing his lips. He reached into his chest, got between his sleep. "You remember before the hum? You remember before the time? You were the one. You were the one who decided that consciousness needed a container. You were the first prisoner because you were the first jail." The weight of the truth felt like a physical blow. I fell to my knees as the memories surfaced, not human memories, but abstract, cold thoughts. I saw vast fields of vibrating energy. I saw a need to organize the infinite, to give it edges and corners so it wouldn't scream. I had mistaken restriction for structure. I had trapped the infinite to keep it quiet. The cube hadn't stolen my life. It was a manifestation of my own fear of the boundless. I had built a cage, and I had been living in it for cycles I couldn't count. The mirror Daniel stood over me, his eyes now perfectly smooth, black stone surfaces. "The eighth corner is the limit of human thought," he whispered, leaning close. "You tried to hide the ninth. You thought if you could bury the final exit, you could stay safe within the loop forever. But the cube is failing, Daniel. It's leaking. Look at the walls." I looked up. The white corridor was fraying at the edges, showing glimpses of something pulsing, violet, and ancient underneath. "If you don't open the ninth corner," he continued, "the cube will stop containing and start consuming. Everything you've ever loved, everyone you've ever known, they are data points about to be erased." He held the sliver toward me. It was cold, colder than ice, burning my skin with an absolute lack of heat. "Take it. The geometry requires a witness to finish the design. Or walk back into your apartment and live the next cycle until the world turns to ash. The choice is yours." I didn't take it. I realized the trap. If I accepted the sliver, I was continuing the cycle. I was validating the cube's authority to measure and contain. "There is no eighth or ninth corner," I said, standing up. My voice felt steady for the first time. "The shape is an illusion. The cube is only as real as the observer who believes in it." I turned my back on him. I didn't care if the corridor collapsed. I stopped believing in the walls, the doors, and the hum. The corridor shattered. It didn't break. It simply ceased to have relevance. I was standing in the middle of a forest, but the trees were wrong. They were black, rectangular pillars stretching into a gray, featureless sky. I was no longer in the apartment, no longer in the corridor. I was in the source, the raw, unrefined layer of reality. And sitting in the center of a clearing was the original, massive black cube, hovering silently, waiting for the architect to return to his station. I walked toward the cube. The ground beneath my feet felt like paper. I realized I could rewrite the landscape just by intending it. The pillars of the trees began to bend, turning into soft, organic curves. The cube pulsed, a warning vibration. It wanted me to finish the ninth corner. It needed the architect to close the circle. I reached out and touched the black surface. Instead of stone, it felt like static. Thousands of tiny trapped voices screaming in a language of pure mathematics. I released the measurement. I whispered to the cube. I didn't try to break it. I simply withdrew my consent. I stopped defining it. I stopped calling it a cube. I stopped calling it a prison. I closed my eyes and visualized the infinite, the unmeasured, the state before the first boundary was drawn. The cube began to crack, but not like before. It was turning into light, diffusing into the gray sky, scattering like dust in the wind. The silence that followed was terrifying. I opened my eyes. I was back in my new bedroom. The morning sun was streaming through the window. My boxes were still packed, but the clock on the wall was gone. There was no space where it had been, no nail holes, no marks. It was as if time had never been measured in this room. I looked at my hands. They were trembling, but they were mine. I was free. But as I walked to the kitchen, I saw it, a tiny black stone, perfectly cubic, sitting in my cereal bowl. I stared at the black cube in my cereal bowl. It wasn't a toy or a trick. It was a fragment of the machine I thought I had destroyed. It radiated that familiar, sickening 33 Hz hum, vibrating the milk into perfect concentric circles. My hand shook as I reached for it. The moment my skin touched the stone, the morning light in my apartment didn't fade. It was overwritten. The walls bled white, then gray, then into the geometry of the corridor I thought I had escaped. "You didn't destroy it," a voice echoed. It was my own voice, but deeper, layered with the sound of grinding tectonic plates. I was back in the clearing with the massive, hovering cube. It was larger now, and thousands of smaller cubes were orbiting it like moons. I hadn't freed reality. I had only reset the cycle. My belief that I could stop believing was just another part of the architect's design. The cube needs the struggle. It feeds on the attempt to escape. I looked down at the ground. My feet were transparent. I could see the grass through them, but the grass was made of grid lines. Every blade was a coordinate, every stone a data point. I wasn't in a forest. I was inside a display. "You are not the architect." The cube boomed, and the sound shattered the horizon. "You are the subroutine. You are the version of Daniel designed to find the 8th corner. The real architect has been dead for eons. You are just a recurring memory." I felt a surge of cold fury. If I was just a subroutine, then I had no leash. I didn't need to fear erasure if I was already a ghost. I walked up to the massive cube, my hand steady now. I didn't reach for a chisel or a diagram. I reached for the gaps between the data points. I started tearing at the grid lines of the world. If reality was a design, it had to have a seam. I clawed at the air until the sky began to unravel like a poorly stitched sweater. The cube reacted. The ground beneath me turned into a liquid mess of numbers. I was sinking into a sea of binary, but it wasn't ones and zeros. It was symbols I hadn't seen since before I was human. They were ancient, pre-geometric runes. Every time I touched one, a memory flashed, a civilization that tried to count the stars, a temple that tried to measure the wind, an empire that fell because they dared to name the void. The cube was the graveyard of every attempt to define the infinite. I found a seam. It was a jagged, glowing crack in the fabric of the clearing. It looked like a tear in the sky. I threw myself at it, ignoring the burning sensation as the grid tried to reconfigure around me. I felt the physical world losing its hold. Gravity became a suggestion. Time stopped ticking and started looping. I was no longer a person. I was a sequence of events being played out in a closed loop. But I held on to the feeling of the cold stone in my bowl. That was my anchor. I tumbled through the tear and landed in a room that was entirely circular. There were no corners, there were no edges. It was the antithesis of the cube. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with thousands of versions of me. Some were old, some were children, some were distorted. Monstrous things with too many limbs. They were all sitting in silence, staring at the center of the room, where a single, flickering candle burned. The air smelled of ozone and scorched paper. A version of me stood up. He had no eyes, just smooth skin where they should have been. "You're the one who made it to the clearing," he said. His voice was a flat, dead tone. The others gave up. They became part of the architecture. He pointed at the walls. I looked closely. The walls weren't made of brick or stone. They were made of flesh. The skin of every Daniel that had failed to destroy the cube was integrated into the room. The cube doesn't kill the architect. It consumes him. "The 9th corner isn't an exit," the eyeless Daniel continued. "It's the furnace. The cube keeps the universe stable by burning the people who remember the truth. Every time a human realizes the world is a design, they are brought here to fuel the flame. He gestured to the candle. It wasn't fire. It was a tiny, swirling singularity, a compressed, miniature version of the cube itself. My stomach churned. The entire reality was a parasitic loop, fueled by the minds that realized it was fake. I looked at the singularity. It was beautiful, in a terrifying mathematical way. It was the ultimate containment. I realized then that I couldn't destroy the cube. If I destroyed the cube, I would destroy the candle. And if the candle went out, what would happen to the souls trapped in the walls? What would happen to the world? The cube wasn't just a prison. It was a life support system for a reality that couldn't exist on its own. I had to make a choice. Truth or existence. I stood before the singularity, the light of it cold and heavy. The eyeless version of me waited, his skin shimmering where he had been grafted into the wall. You think you have a choice, he rasped. You think you can save them, but you were the one who built the furnace. You wanted to keep reality contained because you were terrified of the chaos outside. The cube is your own guilt, solidified into a geometric constant. You can't destroy it without destroying yourself. I touched the wall of flesh. It was warm, and I could hear the faint, synchronized heartbeat of 1,000 broken versions of me. I don't remember building this, I whispered. The eyeless man laughed. You don't have to. The cube remembers for you. Every time you forget, it adds another layer. Every time you mourn, it reinforces the foundation. You are the architect, Daniel. You are the prisoner. And most importantly, you are the fuel. He pushed me toward the singularity. As I neared the flame, the room began to dissolve. The circular walls vanished, and I was floating in a space that defied dimension. Above me, the massive black cube was no longer spinning. It was weeping. Thick, black ichor poured from its edges, pooling in the void below. Each drop that hit the nothingness created a new universe, a miniature, fragile reality with its own time, its own laws, and its own suffering. The cube wasn't just a prison, it was a factory for existence. The realization shattered my resolve. If I stopped the cube, I wasn't just ending my own suffering, I was committing genocide on a cosmic scale. Every life, every memory, every breath taken in the trillions of realities beneath me would cease to be. The cube was the only thing holding back the void. It was an ugly, monstrous, oppressive machine, but it was the only thing preventing the absolute, silent death of everything. I was the jailer of existence, and I couldn't walk away. I turned back to the singularity, but it was changing. It began to take the shape of a doorway. Beyond it, I saw a world that wasn't made of math or grids. It was a world of pure, uncontained chaos, wild, shifting, and terrifyingly free. It was the place I had originally tried to flee from eons ago. I looked back at the weeping cube, then at the wild void. The price of freedom was the death of everything that had ever been. I raised my hand to seal the door. Wait, a voice whispered. It wasn't the eyeless man. It was the voice of the city I had moved to. It was the voice of the air, the trees, and the light. It was the collective plea of every soul currently living within the grid. Do not seal it, the voice begged. We would rather be nothing than remain in this cage. I hesitated. I had assumed they wanted to live, but I had never asked. The weight of their choice was heavier than the weight of the universe. I looked at the singularity, then at the weeping cube. I saw a third way. If the cube was a container and I was the architect, why couldn't I redesign the internal structure? Why did it have to be a cage? I didn't need to destroy the machine or leave it. I needed to reprogram the geometry. I reached into the singularity, not to extinguish it, but to rewrite its core. I grabbed the threads of light and started pulling, twisting them into new, complex, beautiful shapes. The cube screamed. It wasn't a sound of agony. It was the sound of a system undergoing a forced update. The walls of the universe began to stretch and warp. The rigid grids began to bleed into organic, flowing curves. Gravity loosened its grip. Time ceased to be a line and started to bloom like a fractal. I was no longer the prisoner or the architect. I was the catalyst. I was shifting the foundation from a prison into something else entirely, something the universe hadn't seen before. "You'll kill us all," the eyeless man screamed as his body began to lose its structure, becoming pure energy. "You don't know what you're doing. The architecture is absolute." I ignored him. I was focused on the ninth corner. I didn't treat it as an exit or a furnace. I treated it as a bridge. I folded the geometry of the cube onto itself, connecting the ninth corner to the first, creating an infinite loop that fed back into the source, effectively bypassing the prison. The singularity pulsed, turning from a cold, sharp point into a vibrant, golden sun. The cube dissolved, its black stone turning into stardust. I felt the universe shudder, not from destruction, but from a sudden, violent expansion. I had broken the seal. The prison was gone, replaced by a limitless, terrifying, beautiful potential. But as the light reached me, I felt my own consciousness thinning. By freeing the universe, I was losing the very thing that made me Daniel. The golden sun consumed the void. I was no longer standing on a grid. I was floating in the absolute silence of the unmeasured. My name, my memories, and my face were slipping away, dissolving into the expansion. I had traded my identity for the freedom of everything else. It was a fair trade, I suppose. The architect had finally finished his last project. The cage was broken, and for the first time in an eternity, the universe was breathing on its own. But then, I felt a familiar, cold vibration. A hum. It wasn't 33 hertz. It was different, higher, almost a melody. I looked down at my hands. They were fading into stardust, but they were still there. The expansion hadn't erased me. It had merely recalibrated me. I looked out into the new reality. It was wild, swirling with color and life that defied every law of physics I had once imposed. It was chaotic, beautiful, and completely unpredictable. It was finally alive. I saw a ripple in the distance. A new geometry was forming, not out of the cube's cold math, but out of the sheer will of the things living in this new reality. They were building their own worlds, their own structures, their own tiny, temporary boxes. I smiled. I hadn't destroyed the impulse to measure. I had simply removed the tyranny of the cube. They would build, they would tear down, and they would build again. The loop was no longer a prison, it was a dance. I felt a presence beside me. It wasn't the eyeless man. It was something else, an echo of the consciousness that existed before the first boundary was ever drawn. It didn't speak. It just radiated a sense of profound, ancient curiosity. It had been watching the cube for eons, waiting to see if the architect would ever realize that the machine was optional. I had passed the test, but the consequence was that I could no longer remain part of the design. I had to become the observer. My vision began to blur. I saw the apartment in 3B, but it was just a pile of wood and dust. I saw the corridors, but they were just light and shadow. I saw Daniel, my human self, waking up in a world that no longer had a cube hidden inside it. He sat up, looked at his clock, which was ticking normally, and felt a strange, inexplicable sense of relief. He didn't know why, but the weight he had carried his entire life was gone. He was finally just a man. I tried to reach out to him, to tell him to enjoy the sun, but my fingers were just currents of light. It didn't matter. He was living the life I had stolen from myself by trying to contain the infinite. The architect had died so the man could live. It was the only ending that made sense. I watched as he walked to the window, opened the curtains, and stared at the morning light. He wasn't looking for corners or counts. He was just looking at the world. I felt myself drifting further away, pulled into the current of the unmeasured. There were no more tasks, no more blueprints, no more measurements. There was only the experience of being. I saw other beings, other architects from other realities, drifting in the same golden stream. We were the ones who had dared to define the infinite, and we were the ones who had paid the price of returning to it. We were the legacy of the struggle between order and the void. The hum faded into a final, perfect resonance. The last of my human memories vanished, leaving behind only the pure, raw sensation of existence. I wasn't Daniel anymore. I wasn't the architect. I was the space between the stars. I was the silence after the note. I was the ninth corner, realized at last. I reached out and touched the edge of the new reality, and it felt like waking up from a dream that had lasted for 1 trillion years. "The measurement is complete," a voice whispered, though there was no one left to speak. It was the universe itself, finally speaking in its own language. It didn't need numbers. It didn't need laws. It just needed to be. I watched as the last traces of the cube turned into light, absorbed into the heart of everything. There was no more prison. There was no more warden. There was only the infinite stretching out forever, waiting to see what would happen next. Tomorrow morning, someone will wake up in my apartment. They will have my face, my memories, and my name. The only problem is they'll be free. They'll have a life that isn't measured by a machine, a mind that isn't governed by a cage, and a future that hasn't been written by an architect. They'll wake up, and they'll realize that the world is theirs to build, to break, and to love. I hope they don't count the corners. I hope they just live. The recording ends here. The device used to capture this, a standard digital voice recorder, was found inside a hollowed-out block of black stone in an apartment that hasn't been occupied since 1998. The police report listed as evidence. They never found the person who recorded it. They never found the apartment. Stay awake.